That afternoon, Lucknow railway station was packed with people. The loudspeakers echoed non-stop throughout the station. Trains arrived and departed one after another. Some people dragged heavy suitcases behind them. Others rushed desperately to catch trains that were about to leave. No one paid attention to the loud crash that had happened near the walkway leading to the parking area. Not until someone suddenly shouted, "Someone's been hurt!" The crowd instantly turned to look. A young woman was lying motionless on the concrete ground. Her long hair covered most of her face. A deep wound on her forehead sent blood streaming down her neck, soaking the front of her clothes. Her handbag lay several feet away. Its contents were scattered everywhere. Her phone had been crushed beneath a luggage cart. The screen was shattered into dozens of pieces. One man walked over and stared for a few seconds. Then he pulled his suitcase and walked away. Two young men nearby took out their phones and recorded a 5-second video. One of them even stepped closer to capture a clearer shot of her blood-covered face. A woman covered her mouth in shock. But after a few moments, she quickly grabbed her son's hand and left the crowd. Whispers spread everywhere. Some people stopped to look. Others stood at a distance and pointed. Then, one by one, they returned to their own lives. 5 minutes passed. The crowd began to thin. 10 minutes passed. The large station courtyard almost returned to normal. Train whistles continued to echo through the air. Trains kept arriving and leaving. A tea vendor pushed his small cart across the platform. He glanced at the young woman lying on the ground. He looked at the trail of blood spreading across the concrete. Then quietly continued walking. A strong gust of wind swept through the station. Several advertising flyers rolled across the ground beside her motionless body. Among thousands of people passing by, the young woman lay there completely alone, still unconscious, still bleeding, slowly losing the fight to stay alive. And then, on the opposite side of the station, Arjun Verma stepped out of a recruitment office with a wrinkled folder in his hand. His third job interview rejection of the month had just ended. He lowered his head and started walking away, until he noticed a few people pointing toward the far end of the station. Arjun looked up. He followed their gaze, and suddenly froze. In the middle of the crowded station courtyard, a young woman was lying motionless in a pool of blood. Her breathing was growing weaker by the second. She looked almost as if she were already dead. Arjun rushed to the young woman's side. Dropping to his knees on the cold concrete, he carefully placed trembling fingers against her neck. There was still a pulse. Weak, very weak, but it was there. Without hesitation, Arjun pulled the scarf from around his neck. He pressed it firmly against the wound on her forehead. Within seconds, the fabric turned red. "Please, somebody help me." He turned toward the crowd. "Someone call an ambulance." A few people glanced over, then looked away. One man shrugged. "Ambulances take forever around here." A young man nearby continued recording with his phone. As if he were watching a show, Arjun clenched his jaw. His eyes scanned the area. They couldn't wait. Not another minute. He bent down and tried to lift the young woman into a sitting position. But her body was completely limp. The blood kept flowing. A cargo rickshaw rolled past the station exit. Arjun sprinted toward it. "Please, help me take her to a hospital." The driver looked at the blood covering her clothes. His face immediately hardened. "No." And with that, he pedaled away. Arjun stood frozen for a moment, then turned back. He picked up the torn handbag lying on the ground, quickly stuffing the scattered belongings inside. A small notebook, a wallet, a lipstick, several papers stained with blood. Then he slipped one arm behind her back, trying his best to lift her. The young woman's entire weight collapsed against him. Step by step, Arjun helped her toward the station gate. Sweat streamed down his forehead. At some point, his job application folder slipped from his hand. The papers inside scattered across the station courtyard. The wind carried them away. He never looked back. Outside the station, a line of taxis waited for passengers. Arjun desperately waved for help. The first driver saw the blood and rolled up his window. The second shook his head and drove away. The third heard the word hospital and immediately started his engine. The young woman on his shoulder let out a faint groan. Her head dropped heavily against his chest. The scarf around her forehead was now soaked dark red. Arjun looked at his watch, then at the road ahead. The nearest hospital was still more than 2 kilometers away. He took a deep breath, tightened his grip around her, and began to run through the crowded streets of Lucknow. A poor young man carrying a complete stranger on his back, running against time, running against death itself. The full weight of her body pressed down on Arjun's shoulders. Blood seeped through the scarf wrapped around her head, running down his arms. Drop by drop, the faded shirt he wore soon became stained with dark red marks. Arjun gasped for breath. Sweat poured from his forehead, down his cheeks, down his chin. But he didn't stop, not even for a second. On one side, there was sweat. On the other, blood. Both mixed together on the arms that were trembling from exhaustion. Car horns blared behind him. Crowds rushed past him. The city continued with its busy life. But Arjun focused on only one thing, taking one more step, then another, and another. Because somewhere deep inside, he knew that if he stopped now, the young woman on his back might never open her eyes again. By the time Arjun burst into the emergency room, he could barely feel his legs. His faded shirt was soaked with blood. Sweat streamed down his face. 2 nurses rushed forward with a stretcher. The young woman was quickly taken inside. Moments later, the emergency room doors slammed shut. Everything had happened so fast. Only then did Arjun finally have time to look at himself. Blood on his hands. Blood on his shirt. Blood on his worn-out shoes. He slowly lowered himself onto a cold metal chair in the hallway. His chest still rose and fell heavily. His heart pounded like a drum. A nurse walked to the reception desk. A few minutes later, she returned. "Where is the patient's family?" Arjun shook his head. "I don't know." The nurse frowned. "Then who is going to pay the emergency deposit?" "How much is it?" 3,000 rupees. For a moment, Arjun said nothing. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an old wallet. Inside were only a few crumpled bills. He counted them carefully. 3,200 rupees. Everything he had left. His rent money. His food money. The money he needed to travel to future job interviews. Arjun looked toward the emergency room door. The red light above it was still glowing. A life was hanging by a thread behind that door. Without asking another question, he quietly placed every bill on the counter. "Please save her." The cashier looked up. "Are you a relative?" "No." "Your girlfriend?" "No." "Then who is she?" Arjun lowered his eyes. "I don't know." The cashier stared at him for several seconds, as if trying to understand what kind of person would spend his last rupees on a stranger, then silently accepted the money. Arjun took back his wallet. Only a few coins remained inside. At that exact moment, 2 police officers entered the hallway. One of them looked at the blood covering Arjun's clothes. The other glanced at the handbag sitting beside him. "You're the one who brought the victim here?" "Yes." "Your name?" "Arjun Verma." "Did you know her?" "No." The officer wrote something down. "Where did you find her?" "Lucknow railway station." "You brought her here alone?" "Yes." The officer's eyes moved toward the handbag. "That belongs to her?" "Yes." "Why is it with you?" "I picked it up at the scene." The officer continued writing, but his expression changed. The questions became colder. Sharper. More suspicious. The atmosphere in the hallway slowly grew heavy, as if Arjun had done something wrong. As if saving a life required an explanation. Then suddenly, the sound of screeching brakes echoed outside the hospital. Several black luxury vehicles stopped in front of the entrance. One after another. The doors opened. Men in expensive suits stepped out quickly. Hospital staff immediately moved aside. The air itself seemed to change. Leading the group was a middle-aged man. His hair was streaked with gray. His face was calm, but every step carried authority. The kind of authority that came from power, and wealth, and influence. He walked directly toward the emergency room. "Doctor." His voice was low, controlled, yet impossible to ignore. "How is my daughter?" The doctor quickly explained the situation. The man listened without interruption, then gave a slight nod. For a few seconds, he stood silently, observing everything around him. The emergency room door, the bloodstains still visible on the floor, the torn handbag resting on the chair, and finally, his eyes settled on Arjun. The faded shirt, the dusty shoes, the dried blood on his arms, the exhausted face. The man studied him carefully, without speaking, as though assembling pieces of a puzzle in his mind. Then he turned toward the police officer. "Who is he?" The officer replied, "He's the one who brought your daughter here." The man's eyes returned to Arjun. Calm, sharp, impossible to read. "What is your name?" "Arjun Verma." "Where did you find my daughter?" "At Lucknow railway station." "Did you know her?" "No." "You brought her here alone?" "Yes." The man nodded slightly, then fell silent. The silence somehow felt heavier than any question. The police officer closed his notebook. "We may need you to stay here a little longer." Arjun looked around. Every eye in the hallway was now fixed on him. The nurses, the police, the hospital staff, the wealthy strangers who had arrived with the girl's father. All of them, watching him, judging him, questioning him. More than 2 hours passed. Arjun was still not allowed to leave the hospital. Meanwhile, inside a small room beside the emergency ward, Rajesh Kapoor sat reviewing the investigation report with police officers and his closest assistants. A thick file was placed on the table. Inside were security camera recordings from Lucknow railway station, witness statements, information about the suspect, and the preliminary findings of the investigation. Rajesh slowly turned each page. No one spoke. The room remained silent, except for the sound of paper turning. Several minutes later, he closed the file. He was telling the truth. One of the officers nodded. Every part of his statement matches the CCTV footage. An assistant immediately opened another report. "But there's something else." Rajesh looked up. "We've identified the thief." The assistant hesitated for a moment. He previously worked for a security company connected to Meta Group. The room instantly fell silent. Meta Group, Rajesh Kapoor's biggest business rival for nearly a decade. Another assistant continued. 3 months ago, our bidding documents were leaked. 1 month ago, the southern manufacturing plant was sabotaged. Last week, someone reported seeing Miss Kapoor being followed. Rajesh slowly rose from his chair, then walked toward the window. If all of those incidents were connected, then today's attack was not a random robbery. It was something far more dangerous. He stared into the darkness outside, thinking, calculating, connecting pieces. Then he turned his head toward the far end of the hallway, where Arjun still sat alone on an old metal bench, quiet, exhausted, covered in dried blood. One assistant lowered his voice. "Do you think he could be involved?" Rajesh studied the young man for several seconds, then slowly shook his head. "No. The cameras already answered that question." For the first time that night, Rajesh truly believed the stranger had saved his daughter's life. At that exact moment, the emergency room doors opened. A doctor hurried into the hallway. Everyone immediately stood up. Rajesh stepped forward. "How is my daughter?" The doctor removed his mask. The exhaustion on his face was impossible to hide after hours of surgery. "She's out of danger." A wave of relief swept through the corridor. Several people closed their eyes. Others let out long breaths they didn't realize they had been holding. But the doctor wasn't finished. He looked directly at Rajesh. His expression suddenly became serious. "Mr. Kapoor, if she had arrived even 10 minutes later, we wouldn't have been able to save her." Silence. Complete silence. The words seemed to freeze the entire hallway. Rajesh stood motionless. For the first time that night, the man who had remained calm through billion-dollar negotiations, ruthless competition, and countless crises, looked shaken. A father's fear finally appeared behind the face of a businessman. Slowly, Rajesh turned around. His eyes moved toward the end of the hallway, toward Arjun. The young man was still sitting alone, his shirt stained with blood, his shoes covered in dust, his face pale from exhaustion. And suddenly, Rajesh no longer saw him as a stranger. He saw the man who had carried his daughter through the streets while everyone else walked away. The man who had spent his last rupees to keep her alive. The man who had fought death for someone he didn't even know. Just then, the doctor smiled softly. "There's one more thing." Rajesh looked back. "What is it?" The doctor's tired smile widened. "Your daughter just regained consciousness." For a brief moment, Rajesh closed his eyes in gratitude. Then the doctor added, and the first thing she said was, everyone in the hallway turned toward him. The doctor glanced at Arjun, then back at Rajesh. "She wants to meet the man who saved her life." At the far end of the corridor, Arjun slowly lifted his head, completely unaware that the next few minutes were about to change his life forever. After hearing the doctor's words, Rajesh Kapoor stood still for several seconds, deep in thought. Then he slowly began walking toward the far end of the hallway, where Arjun was sitting alone. The moment Arjun saw him approaching, he immediately stood up, almost by instinct, like someone preparing himself for yet another round of questions. Another investigation, another accusation. But this time, Rajesh didn't ask anything. He simply looked at the young man standing before him. For a long moment, the suspicion that had filled his eyes earlier was gone, replaced by something else, something closer to respect. "Come with me." Arjun looked surprised, but nodded. A few minutes later, the two men stood outside a hospital room. Rajesh turned toward him. "The doctor said my daughter wants to see you." Arjun swallowed nervously, then nodded again. The door slowly opened. The smell of antiseptic drifted into the hallway. The young woman lay quietly on the hospital bed. A white bandage wrapped around her head. Her face was pale, weak, but her eyes were open, alive. When she saw Arjun, recognition immediately appeared on her face. It was him, the man from the station, the only person who had walked toward her while everyone else walked away, the only person who had chosen compassion over convenience. Her eyes slowly filled with tears. "You." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You're the one who saved me, aren't you?" Arjun looked uncomfortable, embarrassed. "It was nothing. I just happened to be there." The young woman gently shook her head. "No, I remember." The room became completely silent. "I wasn't fully unconscious. I remember hearing people talking. I remember someone calling for help. I remember someone lifting me." Her eyes never left Arjun. "And I remember your voice." For a moment, no one spoke. Rajesh watched everything from beside the bed. He saw the sincerity in his daughter's eyes and the awkward humility in Arjun's. There was no pride, no expectation, no hidden motive, just an ordinary young man who had done the right thing, even when everyone else had chosen not to. Slowly, the young woman raised her hand. "Can you come closer?" Arjun stepped toward the bed. She looked directly into his eyes and quietly said, "Thank you." A tear rolled down her cheek. "Thank you for not leaving me behind." Those words hit harder than anything Arjun had heard all day. Harder than the police questions. Harder than the rejection letters. Harder than the exhaustion that still burned through his body. Because for the first time, someone truly understood what he had done. Arjun lowered his gaze, not knowing how to respond. He simply nodded. At that moment, a nurse entered the room. "Is there someone here named Arjun Verma?" Arjun raised his hand. "That's me." The nurse handed him an envelope. "The hospital has completed the admission paperwork. This is the receipt for the emergency deposit." Rajesh frowned slightly. "Emergency deposit?" The nurse nodded. When the patient arrived, there were no family members present. She glanced toward Arjun. He paid the entire amount himself. The room instantly fell silent. Rajesh looked at the receipt, then at Arjun, then back at the receipt. "The money came from you?" "Yes." "All of it?" Arjun didn't answer, but his silence spoke louder than words. The nurse quietly added, "It was 3,000 rupees. He paid everything he had." Rajesh stared at the paper. His expression slowly changed. For the first time, he truly understood the sacrifice this young man had made. Arjun wasn't rich. He wasn't powerful. He wasn't connected. Yet he had given away the last money in his pocket to save a stranger. Rajesh slowly folded the receipt. His eyes remained fixed on Arjun, a young man who had nothing, yet had given everything. And at that exact moment, a phone suddenly rang. One of Rajesh's assistants answered. His face immediately turned pale. The room grew tense. "What happened?" Rajesh asked. The assistant swallowed hard. "Sir," his voice trembled, "we have a problem." Rajesh narrowed his eyes. "What problem?" The assistant looked around the room, then said the words nobody expected to hear. "The man arrested for the attack at the station. He has disappeared." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The room fell into stunned silence. Even the machines beside the hospital bed seemed louder than before. Rajesh slowly turned his head. The expression on his face hardened, because everyone in that room suddenly understood the same thing. If the attacker had escaped, then this story wasn't over. In fact, it might only be beginning. The next morning, Arjun stood in front of the towering headquarters of Kapoor Group. For several seconds, he simply stared at the massive glass building. It felt like a different world, a world he had never imagined entering. Because Arjun came from the slums on the outskirts of Lucknow, a tiny tin-roofed room, scorching hot during summer, leaking from every corner during the monsoon season. But it was there that Arjun had grown up. Every morning, he woke before sunrise to attend school. Every night, he studied beneath a dim, flickering light long after everyone around him had gone to sleep. No one in his family was wealthy. No one held power or influence. The only things Arjun possessed were his education and a kind heart. Rajesh Kapoor had seen that, and after their conversation at the hospital, he decided to give Arjun an opportunity, a chance that could change his life. But his first days at Kapoor Group were far from easy. Many employees looked at him with suspicion. Some whispered behind his back, "He just got lucky. He saved the boss's daughter and got rewarded. This is nothing more than favoritism." Arjun heard every word, but he never argued. He never complained. He simply worked, day after day, arriving earlier than everyone else, leaving later than everyone else, learning quietly, improving quietly, proving himself quietly. Over time, people began to notice, not because of who had hired him, but because of how hard he worked. Meanwhile, Pretty slowly returned to her normal life. Yet something about her surprised Arjun. Unlike many wealthy heirs who spent their time at luxury events, Pretty spent hers helping people. She visited poor neighborhoods, underfunded schools, families struggling to survive. One afternoon, after distributing scholarships to children from low-income families, Pretty watched the children excitedly holding their new books. A smile appeared on her face. Then she softly said, "I've always believed success only has meaning when it helps someone else succeed too." Arjun fell silent, because those were the exact words he had carried in his heart since childhood. From that day forward, they began working together on community projects, traveling to remote villages, building classrooms, funding education programs, supporting families in need. The more time Arjun spent with Preeti, the more he admired her. Not because she was the daughter of a billionaire, not because of her wealth, but because she genuinely cared about people, because behind her privileged life was a heart full of compassion. And somewhere along the way, friendship slowly became something deeper. Across the room, Rajesh Kapoor watched everything. Quietly, patiently, he observed how Arjun treated employees, how he respected people regardless of their position, how success never changed him, and how the same young man from the railway station still existed beneath the suit and office badge. Trust slowly replaced doubt. Respect slowly replaced caution. Then one day, during a press conference held by the Kapoor Foundation, a journalist unexpectedly raised a question. "Miss Kapoor, many people say you and Arjun come from completely different worlds. What do you think about that?" The room instantly fell silent. Every camera turned toward her. Pretty looked at Arjun, then smiled. "The poor are not the people who have no money." A murmur spread through the audience. There are many wealthy people whose hearts are empty. She paused. Her eyes never left Arjun. The truly poor are those who have no compassion. And Arjun has both compassion and courage. The room became completely silent. Even the reporters stopped writing. Pretty continued. "A person's worth is not measured by the balance in their bank account. It is measured by what they are willing to do for others." Those words quickly spread across newspapers, television channels, and social media. Millions of people shared them. Millions admired them. But somewhere, in the shadows, the people responsible for the attack years earlier became nervous. Because Pretty's influence was growing, and she was becoming harder to silence. Several months later, during a large outdoor charity event, everything changed again. A stranger suddenly appeared in the crowd, hidden among hundreds of guests, hidden among smiling faces. But in his hand was a gun, and it was aimed directly at Pretty Kapoor. Everything happened in seconds. Too fast for anyone to react. Too fast for security guards to respond. Too fast for most people to even understand what was happening. But Arjun saw it. The same instinct that had saved her at the railway station returned. Without thinking, he threw himself forward, grabbing Pretty, pulling her out of danger. Just moments before disaster struck, screams erupted. People ran in every direction. Security rushed toward the attacker. Chaos exploded around them. But Arjun never let go. Once again, he stood between Pretty and danger. Once again, he saved her life. When the chaos finally settled, Rajesh Kapoor slowly walked toward him. The older man stared at Arjun for a long moment, thinking about everything that had happened. The railway station, the hospital, the months of hard work, the loyalty, The courage, the sacrifice. The young man from the slums had become the person he trusted most. Rajesh placed a hand on Arjun's shoulder. His voice was steady, emotional, filled with gratitude. "You saved my daughter twice." Arjun lowered his head respectfully, but Rajesh continued, "And today, I have no reason left to stand in your way." Pretty's eyes immediately filled with tears. For a moment she couldn't speak. Rajesh smiled. Then, for the first time, he reached out and took both of their hands, joining them together. No words were needed, because everyone understood. Two people from worlds that should never have met had found each other through kindness, through courage, through humanity. And sometimes, the thing that changes a person's destiny isn't money. It isn't status. It isn't luck. It's simply the decision to do the right thing when nobody else is willing to. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment and share where you're watching from. May you and your family always be blessed with health, peace, and happiness. And may you never lose the kindness in your heart. Because one act of kindness can change someone else's life. And sometimes, it can change your own forever.